Jesus heals a woman and raises a girl. Our passage today is from Mark chapter 5, verses 21 through 43. This is a part of the Gospel Project. This quarter, our summer theme is Jesus the Servant, and it will be for the next 3 months. And for the month of June, we're also beginning to look at Unit 22, Jesus the Healer, and we'll be going through the Gospels here. So it's Jesus the Servant Healer. And last week we looked at our first lesson under this particular unit. Jesus heals 10 lepers on June the 7th. And also today, Jesus heals a woman and raises a girl, June 14th. And this is where we are. So if you have your Bibles, turn with me to Mark chapter 5 and also look in your book for this second section. And I believe it's on page 18. Jesus the Servant. Jesus the Servant heals a woman and raises a girl. Mark chapter 5, verses 21 through 43. And also, if we were to take this session and put it into one sentence, Jesus calls us to have faith in his power over private affliction, impurity, and death. So let's look first of all at the session outline. Jesus has power over private affliction. Jesus has power over impurity. And then the third we'll be looking at today, Jesus has power over death. And it's in Mark chapter 5, verses 35 and 36. And it just really takes us all through the 5th chapter of the Gospel of Mark. Let's take just a brief overview of a look at the Gospel of Mark. It's the beginning of the good news of Jesus is the theme, and it's the shortest of the Gospels. Well, it's primarily written for a Roman world, and it presents Jesus as a servant to accomplish God's work. It's more of a book of deeds than of words. You're not going to find any long discourses here in the Gospel of Mark. There's an emphasis on miracles, and the word straightway or immediately actually appears over 40 times, creating within it a sense of urgency in that which is occurring and transpiring. So here's what we know thus far. This is a story within a story. It's a miracle within a miracle. One is a ruler, the other is rejected. But both of these are lost causes. These two miracles reveal the power and the pity of Jesus both at the same time. And in the two previous miracles, that goes in this grouping, Jesus has just demonstrated he's the Lord over nature. When he was in a boat, the disciples woke him up and said, "We're going to drown if you don't do something." He rebuked the wind, and the wind and the waves responded. Also, Jesus is Lord over the demonic, for they passed through Gadara. The demoniac from the Gadara tombs had over 1,000 demons in him, and Jesus spoke the word, and those demons left that demoniac, and he became the first evangelist in that area. There has never been a successful assault on the miracles of Jesus. The reason why is there were too many of them. They were too complete, they were too divine, they were too obvious, there were too many eyewitnesses, there were too many places, and too many unique and differing events. Now, there was a great deal of pushback on the words of Jesus, but no one ever tried to deny the miracles. And when we come to the place where this woman with the issue of blood for 12 years pushed through the crowd, everyone she touched became unclean on that particular day. Let's look at the passage of Scripture and just follow along as we consider this. In these moments, Jesus has power over private affliction. And a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years. She had suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors and had spent all that she had, yet instead of getting any better, she grew worse. Now, actually, Luke says it in a different fashion because he's a physician, I guess. He explains it that she was just incurable. However, in the Jerusalem Medical Association, in the Talmud there, the treatment for her issue of blood was, one of the treatments was to carry ostrich egg ashes in a linen bag in the summer and a cotton bag in the winter. And if that doesn't work for you, then carry a barley corn found in donkey dung. And if that doesn't work for you, drink wine with onions in it. Or maybe drink wine with alum and crocuses all crushed up inside of it. So, I guess if you want to look at it that way, yes, she was a lost cause because anyone was not coming any closer to figuring out a cure for her particular situation. Well, when she heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak because she thought, if I touch his clothes, I will be healed. Well, immediately her bleeding stopped and she felt in her body that she was freed from her suffering. Notice the word immediately there, indicating the instantaneous change that has taken place in her body. Now in verse 30, Jesus has power over impurity. Once Jesus realized that power had gone out from him, he turned around in the crowd and asked, "Who touched my clothes?" He didn't ask the question for information. He asked the question to draw the woman out into the crowd. This is a woman that everyone pretty much knew had an issue with blood. Having had it for 12 years, she actually had begun to have this problem when Jesus was about 20 years of age. Also, she had this problem about the same time that the daughter of Jairus, whom we're going to be looking at here in a few moments, about the same year that Jairus' daughter was born. But he didn't ask this question for information. He asked this question to draw this woman out into public so that she could say something about her particular situation and how she had been healed and what was going on in her life at that particular moment. And Jesus kept looking around. He knew exactly where to look. He knew exactly where she was, but he was waiting on her to respond appropriately. Because when this woman pushed through the crowd, this is a woman that everyone pretty much knew had an issue with blood. Having had it for 12 years, she actually had begun to have this problem when Jesus was about 20 years of age. Also, she had this problem about the same time that the daughter of Jairus, whom we're going to be looking at here in a few moments, about the same year that Jairus' daughter was born. But he didn't ask this question for information. He asked this question to draw this woman out into public so that she could say something about her particular situation and how she had been healed and what was going on in her life at that particular moment. And Jesus kept looking around. He knew exactly where to look. He knew exactly where she was, but he was waiting on her to respond appropriately. Because when this woman pushed through the crowd to get to Jesus, to touch the hem of his garment, everyone she touched would have been made unclean. According to the Talmud, when she had an issue of blood, it would continue even for 7 days after the blood flow had stopped. Well, her blood flow never stopped. For 12 years, it continued. So this was a way of letting the whole community know, as far as Jesus was concerned, this woman had been healed in a miraculous way. "You see the people crowding against you," his disciples answered, "and yet you can ask, 'Who touched me?'" But Jesus kept looking around to see who had done it. And then the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell at his feet, and trembling with fear told him the whole truth. And he said to her, Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering. Mark chapter 5, verses 35 and 36, we now shift gears and we begin to look at the daughter of Jairus. And the point here is Jesus has power over death. While Jesus is still speaking, some people came from the house of Jairus, the synagogue leader. Your daughter is dead, they said. Why bother the teacher anymore? Once again, a lost cause. Overhearing what they said, Jesus told them, Don't be afraid, just believe. He went in and said to them, Why all this commotion and wailing? The child is not dead, but asleep. By the time Jesus got there, the funeral was already in place, and it was already in process. The sun didn't go down on a dead body in Jewish society. They had to have it in the ground. And so when in a Jewish funeral, you typically are going to have about three different things. One is you're going to have people who are expressing their grief in a loud fashion. And so there's going to be wailing and crying out and a great deal of noise. A second thing that you would have, probably in a situation like with Jairus, is you would have professional wailers and folks who are professionals at grief expression. And their job is to actually come in and help everyone express themselves more fully and more completely with the wailing and the grief. And then the third would be the flutes. And the flutes would come, and the flute players would come, and they would play. They play together, but they don't play the same song. And it was a discordant cacophony, if that's the right word to say, to call it. It's just noise, and it's loud, and it's going on, and it's in process by the time Jesus got there. And he went in and said to them, Why all this commotion and wailing? The child is not dead, but asleep. But they laughed at him. Human faith is based on experience. And the experience that these folks had, let me explain this, unpack it just a little bit if I possibly can. When you go into a restaurant and order something off of a menu, you don't know the people in the kitchen who are preparing the meal. You don't know the recipe that they've used. You don't know what the ingredients are necessarily, where they got them from. But based on your experience by eating in this restaurant before or others like it, or based upon your experience of the fact that other people are there in that restaurant and they're eating that food, that you've got a reasonable amount of human faith that if you've ordered a hamburger, what you're going to get is a hamburger. It's going to be a piece of meat between two pieces of bread, and there's going to be some lettuce and some pickles and some other things that you recognize, and maybe some mayonnaise and a couple of other things there. Human faith is based upon your experience. You've done this before. Whenever you get in your vehicle to go from point A to point B and you turn the key, you've got a great deal of experience based on the fact that whenever you've done that before, the engine started. And then when you put the vehicle in gear, you were able to make the tires roll, and you could steer the wheel, and you were able to get from point A to point B in a reasonable period of time, hopefully without any kind of consequence. That's human faith, and you've got faith in your vehicle that it can do what it's supposed to do, but that human faith is based upon experience. Well, when the parents of this young woman came into this household with Jesus, and Peter, James, and John came into the household along with Jesus and met all of these people who are already wailing and crying out in grief. Their human faith was based on their experience, but there is absolutely no human experience to prepare you for what spiritual faith is all about in any fashion. And when Jesus said, "She's not dead, but asleep," they laughed at him based upon their experience. But what Jesus said was based upon his experience. And after he put them all out, that seems to be the best way to deal with a lot of wailing and a lot of grief taking. He put them out. And he took the father and mother and the disciples who were with him, and they went in where the child was. And he took her by the hand, and he said to her, "Talitha cum," which means, "Little girl, I say to you, get up." It's almost a term of affection, like little lamb or little sweetheart or something like that. "I say to you, get up." And immediately the girl stood up and began to walk around. And just wanted to make a point there. She was 12 years old. I want to make a point here about the fact that she was walking around. The Greek word's peripateo. It really means to walk about. And notice here, when she's been dead, she's probably been dead for a few hours. Her body's turned blue, or whatever would have happened in that brief period of time. But when Jesus brought her back and said, "Get up," her spirit, her breath, her heart started beating. Everything came back to her, and she got up and was completely normal in every way. No therapist was needed whatsoever to help her with any breathing treatments. No one had to help her get up off of the bed. She was completely mobile, and they were completely astonished by what they saw. In fact, in the King James Version, it says something to the effect of they were astonished with their astonishment. Their maximum astonishment was what had occurred here at this place. So let's look at a summary here of what we've looked at over these past several verses together. For one is this. This is a story within a story. It's a miracle within a miracle. There's no real reason. It's interesting to note the two people who were picked to be included here. There's no real reason to think that they would even known each other at all. One was a ruler, the other was a reject. One was rich, the other was poor. One was the center of society, the other was an outcast. One was desperate, and so was the other. And both of them were completely lost causes whatsoever without the intervention of Jesus. What we also see are some attributes of Jesus that might easily be overlooked in the press of the crowd on this particular day. One is the accessibleness of Jesus, accessibility of Jesus. He came from the water. When his boat touched land, he was immediately met by Jairus, who bowed down in front of him. The crowd pressed all around him. Jesus was accessible to the crowds. We do not have a God who is not accessible to us, but rather he is very accessible to us, and we can bring all of our petitions to him. But more than just a general petition and a general crowd pressing all around, he was available to Jairus, who bowed down in front of him, a ruler of the synagogue, a religious man, as compared to the woman with the issue of blood. Religion never was never a part of her conversation with Jesus whatsoever. He was available for Jairus. But not only was he available for Jairus, on his way to see Jairus and to see his daughter, he was interruptible as well. And the woman with the issue of blood for 12 years interrupted him on his way. And we see that Jesus is one who is not set on a course that can't be changed, but actually we can gain his attention and he can respond accordingly to what our needs are. I also picked a word here, unflappable. I guess we could, I'm not sure how often that word is used, but what it means is unperturbable. If you might like another word here that would mean something of the same thing. Jesus walked from a crowd pressing him on every way to a moment when a woman touches him and righteousness flows out of him and she's healed. The crowd continues to press on him. He walks into the middle of a funeral and he is in charge the entire time. He never loses control. He never loses his patience. And he just moves right quickly through. And we all see the compassion of Christ as well with the mother and father of the daughter of Jairus, as well as compassion with the woman who had this issue of blood for all of these years. Both were lost causes. I keep mentioning this because it's an important point to note. Without the intervention of Jesus, both of these people were lost causes. How many lost causes has Jesus rescued? The ship has sunk, reputation is ruined, the blessings are gone, the season is past, the barn door's left open, the life is burned down, the family's gone. What might have been, if only, and on their tombstone it says they had great potential, or at least it would say that, except for the fact that those who were a lost cause were touched by Jesus. And I also couldn't help but wonder to myself, how many were lost causes who were watching this Bible study and found themselves at a place where they could no longer go forward, and the hand of Jesus reached out and touched them and changed their life, and they became a new person altogether. Jesus, the servant, has power over personal affliction, like that of the woman who had the issue of blood for 12 years. Jesus, the servant, has power over impurity, and Jesus allowed her to be able to make sure that everyone knew that that has been taken care of and there's no more impurity. And Jesus, the servant, has power over death. And the daughter of Jairus could tell you that herself. Thank you very much.